Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Varev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toracha b'finu b'fi beit Yisrael, v'niyeh anachnu b'tzetzenu b'tzetzeim beit Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei toratecha l'shma, Baruch atah Adonai lemed Torah l'amo Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah.
Amen.
Guys, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the Mishnah Berurah 178. We learned that a bread meal continues wherever one goes, and so if one left and then restarted eating, one need not make a new hamotzi unless he did bikat hamazon before he left. By non-bread or non-mezonot items, the meal ends as you leave, and therefore you must make a new brocha rishona in the new place. Obviously, first prize, as we learned, is for 2 seconds to Berena. For shorter, takes a minute, but that's assuming you leave. If you don't leave, you just do a new hadama, Eid, Shakor, whatever brocha you're doing in your new location. But the mainstay items of a meal, so for example, mainstay is rice, fish, chicken, juice, etc., are covered by hamotzi made on bread in the first place. So too, they will be covered by bread in the second place, and thus won't require new brocha. So here we're talking about what happens if you have these minor items that are part of the meal with hamotzi. And what we're saying is that you don't have to then do individual brochas. We know this already, because they will be covered by the bread in the second place, and won't require a new brocha. So it's considered one long continuous meal. We know that in the same place you would not have to make brochas on these individual items, but there is a suffix. If you're continuing, say you're only continuing with in the new place with a piece of chicken, but not the bread, etc., do you make a she'akor just on the chicken in the new place? No, because you're going to be benching in the new place if you had to leave in an emergency or you can't come back in time. So therefore, that or the mizunot will cover the rest. So a person who ate chicken and drank soda at the Purim Suda, and then you went to go and visit somebody else's Suda. So you go to somebody else's Suda before having done Bikat Hamazon. When he gets to the other person's Suda, he does not need to make a brocha if he eats chicken or soda for his meal, because your meal is continuing as the result of the bread, as long as you do it within the 72 minutes. The question is regarding the items that aren't covered by bread and require their own brocha in meals such as desserts, fruit, chocolate, sweets, etc. So these are not considered part of the main meal. Sometimes we do a separate brocha, you notice, in the meal on ha'etz. That's a different issue, which we're going to cover. But in the meantime, I just want to go to the shir itself. Okay. So the question is regard to the items that aren't covered by bread and require their own brocha in a meal such as desserts, fruits, etc. The halacha is that they're too considered part of the bread meal and are dragged along with the bread and thus do not require new brocha. Okay? So if a person was at a wedding and ate ice cream and the babysitter called that he needed to come home, he would not have to make a new share call on the ice cream or any other new share call if you continue eating at home, because it's considered a continuation of the bread meal for the wedding. Okay. So that's fine. Let's go to where we of the 3 last time. And I just wanted to give you a quick summary, because if you don't do a quick summary, you're not going to know what's going on in the 13th daf. So it was very, very clear that it was evident from Ravina's response that he understood Rav Nachman to having stated his explanation of the Mishnah, even according to the opinion of Rav Yosef HaGlili. So what has he understood? He meant, Rav Nachman, that Yosef HaGlili maintains that an unblemished bachor, you can sell it nowadays, okay, because there's no temple. You can sell it out of the land of Israel, because we learned that you were discouraged from bringing that particular bachor all the way to the land of Israel. I mean, if you had to go to the land of Israel and you took the bachor with you, as soon as you enter the land of Israel, you sacrifice it. But you needn't make a special trip, and you weren't even encouraged to do so. So in that particular case, during the temple out of the land of Israel, you could sell the Bechor. But in all other cases, Rav Yosef Haglili says that even though it's your property, you can't sell it because it is what? It's being reserved for sacrifice. So there is a question that came up at the end of 12b3, which we never addressed. And so the Gemara asks, if we said as above that Rav Yosef Haglili says that Koch and Kalim are considered the property of their possessor while they are alive, okay, then Ravina should be forced to answer Rava's challenge by saying the following. He should say that Koch and Kalim are deemed the property of the possessors in accordance with Rav Yosef Haglili, while this ruling of Rav Nachman, which invalidates the sale of the Bechor during the temple era, is in accordance with the view of the rabbis. So what is this seeming to say? So it's seeming to say that Ravina should actually separate between the opinion of Rav Nachman and Rav Yosef Haglili, because originally it was proposed that Rav Nachman was agreeing with Rav Yosef Haglili, but it seems that they're saying Rav Nachman has an opinion according to the rabbis, which says what? A Bechor during the temple era, you can't sell it because it's already been reserved. And they're saying Rav Yosef Haglili says that it is the property of the possessor, and the rabbis are saying because you can't, you have to consecrate it, you're not entitled to sell it. So that's what is being proposed now. So just to add a little bit of clarity, when we discussed Kedushin, because this was a review of Kedushin, as you remember, that Rabbi Yosef Haglili maintains that Koch and Kalim that are alive belong to the owner in all cases, even when they are fit to be sacrificed. This was in note B. This was in 12b on note 12. So Ravina should have had no alternative but to answer that Rav Nachman's statement invalidate the sale of the Bechor during the temple era is not in accordance with the view of Rav Yosef Haglili, for according to Haglili, a Bechor may be sold any time. Rather, Rav Nachman was following the view of the rabbis who dispute Rav Yosef Haglili and maintain that a Bechor is considered temple property. Is there any question so far?
No, I'm good.
Carry on.
Carry on.
Okay. So, guys, I just want to make it clear here, because when you read this at first, does it not take something that seemed clear and make it confusing? Because I can't clear it up.
Yes, it did in the beginning, especially on the 13a1, when I started going through it. It was sort of, and I got a bit confused on quite a few things there. But otherwise, that's normal.
Okay. Okay. It is a bit normal, but let me just try and see if I can keep it simple by a couple of sentences, what we learned last time. Okay. If a animal is a Bechor, which means it's a firstborn and in a blemished state, whether it's alive or sacrificed, whether it's alive or dead, basically you can't sacrifice the blemished animal. Remember, Kevin, you asked me this question with the mum. So if an animal develops a blemish, you can't sacrifice it. And therefore, if you can't sacrifice the Bechor, it remains your property. You can sell it. Why not? Why can't the Kohen sell it? So we're asking, what about the individual? So in all cases with the Bechor, let me just make this clear. You have to give it to the Kohen. It's not yours. But if it's unblemished, the Kohen on your behalf will sacrifice it, and you and him partake in certain portions of the meat that are not sacrificed. Does that make sense? In other words, you can only have the meat after you put blood on the altar. The Kohen puts blood on the altar and sacrifices a portion of the animal. We say we're eating from the master's table, and as servants we're entitled to partake of the meal, but because we're eating at the master's table, which is Hashem, it's not our animal to sell in that particular case if it's unblemished. We're merely partaking in the food. It's like
Okay.
yeah. So in other words, it's like a servant whose owner has all the cows and sheep and property, and he feeds his employees at the meal, etc. And they can enjoy the meal, but it's not actually their food. They were given the food. So this is in the case of an unblemished animal. Okay. In the case of a blemished animal, the owner of the Bechor has to give it to the Kohen as a gift anyway. So it's not the owner's. What we're saying there is that if somebody damages the owner's ox, it's still considered the property of the owner in the sense that that person must make restitution to the owner. That's what we said. And we also said that if, according to Rashi, if he designated that particular Bechor for sacrifice and it got lost or damaged or stolen, he has to replace it. If he generally made a declaration about a Bechor, there is a bit of a question in terms of whether or not he has to replace it or not. It's a whole discussion in and of its own. But all we can see from there is there are circumstances, providing the right factors come in, that a Bechor is considered basically the ox of his fellow. So in other words, if somebody damages that ox or they steal it or you damage that ox, it would have to be replaced and then go to the temple for sacrifice. If it's in a blemished state, it's no longer fit for sacrifice, but it has to go to the Kohen no matter what. In that particular case, the Kohen, if it's not going to be sacrificed because it's blemished, can sell it to another Kohen, and that other Kohen has to wait till there's a blemish that develops, and then he can use it. Or, alternatively, he can sell it, but not in a retail market at a butchery, because you're not entitled to make the meat common. In other words, he can sell it from his home, and he's not allowed to use standard weights and measures as if he was a butchery. He's got to underestimate the value of the meat. Why underestimate it? But because you're not allowed to overcharge. In other words, there's a mitzvah to use weights and measurements so that you do not con anybody by overcharging them for items. So if anything, the Kohen has to undersell the meat. Now, there's two different sorts of meat for use. Does everybody know what chulin is?
Yeah.
Kev, have you heard of chulin?
Not sanctified.
Exactly. So there's two different sorts of meat. There's bechoros, which are meat that's going to be sacrificed, of which you can partake in a portion after that has been put on the altar, where you almost getting benefit from the master's table. And then there's chulin, which is normal kosher meat, which you're going to consume as a regular individual. There are 4 books of chulin in the Schottenstein. It tells you how to shecht an animal, what animal you can use. You can't use the sciatic nerve, the hindquarter, etc., and what's going on. But that's all right. So what I'm saying, guys, is as follows, is that what we're saying is it needn't get too complicated. Generally, the view is that Rav Yossi Haglili agrees with the rabbis. In a case where it's a bechor that's unblemished, the only time you can sell it is where? Out of the land of Israel, or at the time where the temple wasn't standing. Okay. And the rabbis obviously have the same view. Don't get distracted now by this proposition that they're saying all of a sudden, he's saying that a bechor may be sold any time, because this throws you off a bit in the notes. Does that make sense? Because I checked it again. This is an opinion that they say of Ravina, that's saying Rav Nachman, that's saying Rav Yosef Lili. And they're saying this opinion is that he disputes what the rabbis are saying. He doesn't dispute what the rabbis are saying. What they're saying is that why is he bringing this particular case outside the land of Israel? Because if you remember before, when it was talking about the court case and the law of false oaths, when did this occur? It occurred during temple times. So what they were just saying is Rav Yosef Haglili probably wasn't talking in his reference point out of temple times. Why? Because this case that he brings, okay, in other words, I give you a Kochen Kalim to look after, okay? I give you a Bachor to look after, or Shlamim animal to look after, and I'm saying I'm going to sacrifice, take care of it, I'm going to Australia. So I come back, and I say, where's my animal? And you say, what are you talking about? You never gave it to me. Anyway, I drag you off to court and everything else, and I've got witnesses, the next door neighbors that saw me giving it to you. Then you have to replace the animal. You have to give 1/5, and you have to give an ashram offering. Now, the very fact that you have to give an ashram offering proves what? What period of time was this court case on? In the time of?
Temple.
Exactly. Because otherwise, why would you give an ashram offering? So all it's saying is that it occurred during the temple time. We're saying afterwards that Yossi Haglili's case occurs when you can sell a bechor when there was no temple left. And you can't. It still goes to the Kohen. But the Kohen can, because it's not going to be sacrificed. Okay? And it's also stating that out of the land of Israel, what we're saying here is the very fact that there's an Asham offering means it was at the time of the temple. And then what we're also saying is it's unlikely it would have been out of the land of Israel, because why would you then almost have to come all the way back from Babylonia to give a sacrifice? So it's difficult to understand according to this one opinion. So they're saying that maybe Rav Yossi Haglili is talking about that a bechor can be sold anytime. But the main opinion is as follows, is that Rav Nachman agrees with Rav Yossi Haglili that says a bechor can only be sold out of the temple towns or out of the land of Israel, which is exactly the view of the rabbis. Basically, if it has a blemish in it, then a Kohen can either use it or sell it. The main opinion is that the Kohen can sell it to another Kohen if it's unblemished. Why? Because an animal will naturally develop a blemish. Does that make sense, guys? In other words, you give it enough time, an animal is going to injure itself or develop a blemish. So for that reason, we do it simply because, especially in the land of Israel, that the Mashiach could come and the temple could be built. So we're not allowed to just treat it without any sort of sanctity. Okay. So I just wanted to tell you where we're holding now. Now, what we're saying is, before we get to the 13th daf, we're saying in the Gemara in 110b in Bava Kamma, we're learning that the bechor is only one of 24 gifts of Kochim Kalim, which is the lesser, the lesser holiness gifts. And it's only one of 24, the bechor. So what we're saying is here, maybe Rav Yossi Haglili was not talking about the bechor, maybe he was talking about the shalamim offering, or perhaps the maisa offering, or one of the others, and maybe he was also talking about the bechor. So this is how the daf's going to be unpacked. So I'm just going to read a bit and then bring it up to speed. Okay? Ravina should be forced to answer Rava's challenge by saying the brisa, which states that Koch and Kalim are deemed to be the property of the possessor, is in accordance with Rav Yossi Haglili, while the ruling of Rav Nachman, which invalidates the sale of a bechor during the temple era, is in accordance with the view of the rabbis. The Gemara answers by distinguishing between the type of Koch and Kalim that Rav Nachman was discussing and other forms of Koch and Kalim. So now it's going on a discussion of Rav Nachman discussing the different sorts of Koch and Kalim. Do you speak of Kohanic gifts? Do you base your question on a ruling regarding a bechor, which is one of the Kohanic gifts? There are 24. A bechor cannot be compared to other Koch and Kalim because Kohanic gifts are different. For when the Kohanim acquire them, it's from the table of the Most High that they acquire them. So when it's using this point, that A, the Kohanic gifts are different, and B, that when the Kohanim acquire them, it's from the table of the Most High, that they acquire them. What is it trying to say? It's trying to say as follows. The Bechor comes to the Kohen as a gift from Hashem, along with instructions from Hashem to offer it as a sacrifice. So Ravina is basically interpreting Rav Nachman's ruling as having stated that even according to Rav Yosef Haglili, agrees that a Bechor that's unblemished is not the property of a Kohen. Let's just get this clear. He agrees that him and the rabbis are not disputing anything, Rav Haglili and the rabbis, because they're saying the minute it's unblemished, you can't do anything with it. It's already consecrated to Hashem. It's not consecrated from birth. Let's just get this clear. It's consecrated from the time it's shechted. But because it's got a specific destiny, you can't resell it. It's there to be told it's the ox of its fellow, so that if somebody damages your ox, they have to replace it. If you damage your ox, you have to replace it because it has a certain destiny. So until the time at which it's sacrificed, it belongs to that individual, but somebody that damages has to make restitution because it says it's a treachery against Hashem and that person. Why against Hashem? Because Hashem is waiting for that sacrifice. But if it's purely Hashem, then in that particular case, you don't have to make restitution to damage to temple-based property. It's only the ox of his fellow. And it's still the ox of his fellow until the point at which it's sacrificed. So while it's alive, it's the ox of his fellow, but it's not entirely his ox because that owner cannot do with it what he wants. He has to give it to the Kohen. The Kohen can't resell it because the Kohen has to sacrifice it. But if anybody damages that ox or loses it in the interim, it has to be replaced because he's damaged the ox of his fellow, and it's a treachery against Hashem. Okay? So now we're talking about Kochim Kalim, that on the property of the possessor. He's saying, let's look at two other sorts of sacrifices. Shalamim sacrifices, and they're different because they're not regarded as Kohanic gifts, in the sense that the Israelite owners did not receive as divine gifts. How do I put this in a simple way without going through the whole process? Just guys, give me a sec. I don't want to give you the whole process. I want to make it simple. Okay, so the Bechor is the Kohen's only by divine decree. Okay? Now, Kochim Kalim are the property of their possessor. So he's saying that it's either referring to Shalamim or sacrifices whose Israelite owners did not receive as divine gifts, or a Bechor animal in the post-temple era outside the land of Israel, which although Kohanic gifts are not destined to sacrifice. So what it's saying is here is that we're going to see that even within Kochim Kalim, there are different sort of obligations and there are different sort of benefits one can derive. Okay. So now what we're going to do is next session, we're going to discuss Shlamim. Does everybody know what a Shlamim offering is?
It's a peace offering, isn't
That's usually.
Peace offering.
Yes, it is a peace offering, but it's more than that. Shalom means peace, so it is a peace offering, but Shalema means to complete something. So what it is, it's an offering of completion, meaning prosperity. In other words, it's a bird. How do I put this? It covers more than just a peace offering. It's basically, it's you give that sort of offering for health, for prosperity, and for harmony. In other words, when a person is financially healthy, they feel at peace and complete. The same with when one is physically healthy. So while they call it, otherwise it would be called a shalom offering. So the shalemus means it's a completion offering, and you feel peace as a result of having completion. Does that make sense? It's more than just a shalom offering. That's why it has a different word in terms of the etymology. So it's an offering to basically implore Hashem to give us well-rounded success, both in terms of health, prosperity, and harmony, shalom bayis, etc. So that's what it's about. But it hasn't been predestined. Just remember, Bechor is the firstborn, and everybody knows what the Maisa is. It's your 10th sheep. So what happens is as the sheep come out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the 10th sheep you do a marking. So the first sheep and the 10th sheep, or ox, it could be an ox as well, goes, the 10th one will go for a Maisa, and the first one will go for a Bechor. Does that make sense?
Maisa to the coin or to the baby?
Yeah, it goes to the coin. It goes to the coin, either way. That's correct.
For consumption, can do whatever they want with it.
Kohen can't do whatever he wants with it. It depends on what sort of Kohanic gift it is. So what we're going to do next session is we're going to unpack to what extent a Kohen can derive benefit and what sort of sacrifices would need to be given in terms and the procedures involved. Does that make sense? Because we know that a person, once he gives it to the Kohen, in certain cases, the Kohen can sell the item, the gift, and in certain cases, he can only consume it. Now, generally, the law is when he has to sacrifice, he can only consume after the sacrifice for it because Hashem permits him to use it. But if it's a case where the Kohen gets it purely as a gift, like we give the Maisa for the poor, and we give the Levi Truma and the Kohanim, etc., they can consume of it because remember that they didn't have to work because they were involved in temple service, so they needed to be sustained. So in that particular case, there were certain gifts they could use and other gifts they could use which they never owned, only as a result of after the sacrifice was made. That's the right benefit. Correct. So we're gonna break this down. How long do we have, guys?
We got 4 minutes.
Fine. All right. So a Bechor can't be compared to other Kochim Kalim because the Kohanim gifts are different. And with regards to Bechor, it's from the table of the Most High that they acquired. Okay. So the Gemara cites in its entirety the brasa for which the ruling of Rav Yossi HaGlili was excerpted. The full text of the brasa itself, remember the Torah states if a person will sin and commit a treachery against Hashem by lying to his fellow. This verse comes to include Kochim Kalim in the law of false oaths, for Kochim Kalim are deemed the property of their possessor. These are the words of Rav Yosef HaGlili. Now remember we learned in that particular case, it was talking about the Shalamim offering with the false oath. Because one gave a Shalamim to his friend to look after. Okay? The Bechor you have to give, but the Bechor we inferred from Leviticus, which is Vayikra, chapter 5, verse 21. Okay, so we're going to deal with this next time, and we're going to go through it in depth. Guys, thank you very, very much.
Thank you as well.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Damon.
Do you have any questions? Was it fairly clear?
No, it was very clear.
Yeah,
Okay.
clear.
Thanks, Sam.
No, thank
You know, just when you get clarity, it takes you off at a
Yeah,
tangent,
pretty much.
pretty much. Right, guys, have a great day. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, ciao.
Yeah, you too. Cheers. Thanks, Sam.
Bye.